So KC Imagine stands for the Kansas City Institute for Media, Animation, and Graphic Innovation in Education. And the people we have here tonight, myself, I'm the Executive Director of Digistory KC. KC Imagine is a program of Digistory KC, and we have worked in partnership with Thank You Walt Disney. And some of you know about that organization. That's the organization that owns the building Walt Disney started his animation studio in 1922 here in Kansas City, near 31st and Troost. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But Thank You Walt Disney worked with Digistory KC and K-State Olathe, Debbie Kirchhoff. And I want to point out Gary Sage here. Gary, you want to raise your hand? So Gary, Debbie Sage, and I started this effort when we were trying to use the Laugh-O-Gram facility in the future. Our vision was to make that a learning place for people who want to learn more about digital media so we could grow the industry in that space. And we started off KC Imagine with a session at Kaufman where at first really we were just trying to get university partners to help us with educational programming in the area of digital media. But in our first event, we had a panel of 5 people from various digital media firms in Kansas City, and it became obvious in that first meeting that they need to know each other, work with each other. They want to collaborate with each other because they have issues that only by working together can they solve them to grow the industry. So in our session today, we have a representative from our university partnerships, and that's Jim Lane from Johnson County Community College right here. He's the Dean of Arts and Design. He has a long title. He gets paid more for his title. Arts and Design, Humanities and Social Sciences at Johnson County Community College. I have the honor of serving on his advisory committee for the animation program there. They have a great animation program. Look it up. You'll be impressed with what happens there in animation. And then representing our digital media industry firms, we have Chris Waldron, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Andrews McMeel at Universal. So you get to hear from them in a minute about what kind of interests they have with working with KC Imagine, what kind of challenges they face in getting the talent and programming out the door for their institutions. But at first, let's take a look at why we exist. So our mission is to promote collaboration between Kansas City regional stakeholders in the digital media industry. And I'll show you those stakeholders in a minute. And our vision is to establish Kansas City area with a world-class digital media industry that succeeds through its robust talent pipeline and the innovation of its entrepreneurs. So this is our collaboration model. So we're trying to put businesses in touch with universities to help work on shared issues, but also we include in that model local career academies. Those are programs like the CAPS program in Blue Valley and North Kansas City, Prep KC and Summit Tech Academy. We want high school students to be thinking about digital media careers, and we want to make them more aware of what's out there and what's available, and we want to make sure they move into that talent pipeline development cycle with a successful outcome. We also work together to kind of, we also want to make sure that startups in the digital media zone have a good start. In fact, at the Laugh-O-Gram building, when we're up and running, we will have a PlexPod management of that building, and we encourage digital media startups to work with us there, learn about entrepreneurship, get their programs off the ground before they expand and move out because they're growing too fast to stay in our building. So startups are part of this model as well. All of this to be centered in the building at 31st and Forest. So one of the things that I think is not well known in Kansas City, when you think about industry clusters, and those are the industries in Kansas City that people know, this is a big deal in Kansas City, like the automotive industry, BioNexus, logistics, they know all about that. But digital media is not often on the forefront of people's knowledge about, being a major industry in Kansas City. Well, let me put that in perspective for you. BioNexus and that whole health corridor business in Kansas City is about 30,000 workers. In the digital media space, we have 50,000 workers. You may not hear about it quite as much because it's a very decentralized industry compared to those other industries. There are, I would say, the top 3 Fortune 500 companies are Hallmark, Universal, Andrews McMeel Universal, and probably the big one in town is VML, Y, and R. I have to practice saying that all the time. But when you get past those 3 big companies, you're typically talking about organizations that are 10 people or fewer. You know, there's some bigger ones than that, like InTouch Solutions and others around town. But a lot of people in digital media are smaller shops, and they need a lot of support. They need help as much as the big folks do. So we have a large population of workers in this field, and the growth rate is 24% growth over the next 10-year period. So it's only going to get bigger. And when you see things like the metaverse emerging and other forms of digital media needing new talent, it's only going to make it an even stronger growth area. So when we talk about digital media jobs, let me define that for you so you kind of get a sense of what that looks like. We define it as any profession that requires digital technology to develop and produce content that informs, influences, or entertains others. And so here's a look at what those might look like. I have 3 categories here, and they kind of, the 3 categories kind of correspond to the 3 major stages of digital media. There's pre-production, production, and post-production. In the pre-production phase, that's really about original content development, and you see jobs like writers, computer graphics, motion graphics, photography, that kind of thing. The kind of thing you tend to think about with like film production or animation, that kind of thing. Then there's the digital production of content, or the production phase, and then you're getting into things like broadcasting, advertising, promotion, film production. And then the post-production phase is where all the technical experts come in and do all the finesse work on that content. Jobs like video recording technology, cinematography, audio editing, video editing. So there's a wide range of these jobs in Kansas City. And this is a career pathways map that I developed for a curriculum program that we offer through Digistory KC that gives you a sense of how those 3 categories fit across the larger spectrum of jobs. The 2 axes of importance across, you see that there are some jobs fit in the pre-production phase, others in production, and others in post-production. And then downward, you see these strands of areas of expertise. So like strategic communication is an area where a lot of marketing people and public relations people get their expertise. There's the journalism strand, there's entertainment content development, and many others. But you can see by the job titles included across that map that there are a lot of types of needs to meet the digital media job requirements of a region. These are some of the companies in Kansas City that have expressed an interest in what we're doing at KC Imagine. It's a long list, but there are probably, well, there was a study done by Mid-America Regional Council in 2013 that said there are 484 firms that have digital storytelling work in those jobs. And that was so long ago, 9 years ago, that it's greatly increased by now. But you can kind of see the range of companies represented here. Many of them are smaller companies, but you have the major employers too, like Hallmark Cards and VML, Y&R. And these are the university and college programs that are active partners in our KC Imagine program. These are the people that show up when we have our meetings, when we have our special events, and they have a vested interest in participating in this collaboration. Because what we have learned after a study that we did in 2019, there's a pretty large gap in what the digital media firms need in terms of talent and how the universities and colleges are preparing students for that. So there's an ongoing need for collaboration, better understanding, more research, and so these parties love getting together to kind of grow with each other and help us grow our industry. So we feel like we can grow the industry in many ways working together. One is to help colleges adjust their curricula so that it better fits what firms might need. Another is to work with career readiness programs around town to make them more aware of the need to let high school students know there are lots of rewarding jobs available in digital media. We sometimes are kind of left out of that STEM area of where a lot of focus goes, like robotics and that kind of thing. But there are a lot of great, rewarding, and actually fun jobs in digital media that we want to make high school kids aware that, you know, this is an opportunity that might be perfect for you. We also want to make sure that there's greater awareness, first of all, locally in forums like this, but also even nationally, that, you know, we have something to offer in the digital media industry here in Kansas City. That we have a lot of people working on that front. We want to make sure we're supporting the entrepreneurs who get into digital media. And finally, we want to make sure that we're offering forums and continuing education opportunities for those who have a stake in digital media. And I'll tell you more about some of those kind of forums coming up. One I will mention, however, we are going to have a major fall conference. We've got a committee working on that, probably in late October, early November, where a lot of the issues, interests, and kind of research that might be of interest to people can be learned about during that conference this fall. There were some interesting things we learned in our 2019 survey of of digital media firms. Here are some of the highlights. One is that they're unsure about how universities are preparing students for their jobs. They report that a lot of times their curricula does not match their employer requirements. They're not finding enough candidates who will meet their diverse workforce expectations for the job. And they realize that greater collaboration is needed among all those stakeholders in order to better meet the workforce needs of our region. So in a couple of years, if you want to know more about how we want to be located in the old Laffergram building that Walt Disney worked in, talk to Gary. He's the guy that's really driving the fundraising for this effort. And we're really making some significant progress on that front. I joked in an earlier forum like this that we've been saying that we're going to be in that building in 2 years for the last 10 years. Well, this year, I think it's true that in 2 years we should be in that building offering workforce development programs and all kinds of other opportunities in digital media. So this is the drawing done by what used to be Gould Evans, now Multi-Studio. And this shows what the renovated Laffergram building would look like. Some of you who have driven by it recently know it's going through some tuck pointing, going through some facelift work, but there's more to come soon on renovating that building. These are some of the program areas that will be offered in that building. First of all, you know, people are going to be interested in terms of Disney's time there and how it played a major role. We won't go into it today, but it was significant in terms of how it affected the Hollywood animation scene. In fact, it's called the Cradle of Hollywood Animation, but that's another presentation another time. But there will be interesting historical exhibits that are being generated by the Dimensional Innovation folks in Lenexa. They've done some nice work on that. And my organization, Digital Story KC, will be in charge of the digital media training, and that's where we're hoping our university partners, some workforce development partners, and others can make that a vibrant center of solid educational training programs in digital media. And finally, as I mentioned before, PlexPod will make this a co-working space with a focus on digital media entrepreneurs. And so the whole building will be about looking back to what Walt did to really create one of the best enterprises ever created in the world, but how we're going to move forward from there with new imaginative thinking about what can happen in digital media. So we hope to offer a wide range of training. One of the first things we want to do is offer workforce development training for people in that neighborhood who aren't necessarily going on to four-year degree programs, who may need some entry-level jobs in a wide range of areas. But whether it's vocationally oriented or degree-based or continuing ed with our educational partners, we want to offer a wide range of training programs out of that building when we're in there. Right now we have 3 key projects. We formed an advisory board this year, and they're wanting us to work on 3 deliverables that we're working on right now. One is they want us to develop a KC Imagine website where the university people can show their students, here's an apprenticeship opportunity, here's a job placement opportunity, here's where you can get an internship, that type of thing. We want to host the one-day conference we talked about having this fall, and we also want to get a better sense of where we are on that gap between what digital firms need and what colleges are providing. We'll probably do that through a survey, some focus groups, and some other tools that are under development right now. So one thing that we are doing that's a new program that I'm excited to announce is our Digital Scene KC program. This is a program targeted for digital media professionals and educators in digital media. We think one of the most effective forms of continuing education is informal networking, just like we've been doing here tonight, where you make connections, you meet people who may benefit each other by knowing each other and working together. It's a great opportunity to learn new things about technology or what's going on in the industry. So we want to pull those people together in a networking environment. And it's called Digital Scene KC because we want to locate these in very cool venues where people are going to want to come and be a part of that networking effort. So our first event is going to be at the Robert W. Plaster Free Enterprise Center at UMKC on September 14th. And it's going to be all about getting immersed in AR, VR. So there'll be a tour from 4 to 5 of that center, followed by an hour and a half of networking at the Pearson Auditorium. And not only will people get to network there and munch on snacks and have beverages to drink, we also have many vendors there that are showing some cool AR, VR products that they work in. So if you want to know more about that, see me or Jim Starchev. In fact, I want to make an announcement about that program. Just this week, we have worked out with the KC Digital Drive folks that they will be helping sponsor that program. So they'll help us not only fund that, but also pull together the people resources to make that a really strong program. We also have, we're also going to have our second event on November 3rd at Trinity Animation in Corporate Woods, and the focus then will be on animation, so that should be a fun one as well. So if you want to know more about either of those programs, see me or Jim Starchev after the event. So that's the background. That's a lot of time spent in background. What I'd really like for the rest of our time to focus on is why this collaboration matters. Why does Kansas City need KC Imagine? And what are the issues that our digital media firms are facing, the professionals that work for them, what are they facing, and what are universities and colleges facing around preparing people to move into this space where 50,000 employees are needed in the Kansas City area. So with that, let me raise a question for Jim and Chris to respond to. And that question, I'll start out with, why does what KC Imagine is trying to do, why is that important to, let's start with digital media firms. Let's start with you, Chris.
Okay, this is not working. So when I moved into this role at Andrews McMeel in 2019, almost immediately I met you and kind of got involved with the project. At that point, I needed to build the entire staff for the digital organization within Andrews McMeel, and was just starting to get familiar with the city. I didn't know it, but there was a forum with various folks from different universities and colleges, and then a few of us from the business community kind of talking about what we need. And I think we were part of that study of what was the gap between us. And I think the thing that stood out in my mind, the thing that I keep remembering having conversations about, was in a digital organization, you have a lot of very different roles, and often you only get one of each of these things. And so I look at my organization and I'm like, there are 30, 40 different very highly specific roles in this group, and we've got to find one of each of these at least, if not more of them. And so, first of all, knowing that there's enough folks in the area for us to recruit from was important. So knowing that there are universities feeding that pipeline of folks was critical. But also, I think the thing that I kept coming back to from that conversation was, because it's an ensemble cast of folks putting together something digital, collaboration is the most important thing that can happen, right? It's like we can teach you some of the hard skills in the moment if you don't have a specific software package or you've never worked with this, this vendor or whatever it might be. But having everybody harmonize, having everybody talk and work together and sort of pass the work around is probably the biggest challenge I've seen in my career. Because you sometimes you get some lone wolves who want to just do it themselves, and that doesn't work out right. Or you get you can just get certain portions of that ensemble cast aren't as strong as others, and so you need to keep that going. And so I hear talking to the educators there and understanding more about what they were doing, not just to teach them, hey, here's how you draw, here's how you code, here's how you manage a project, here's how you do these things. It's more about how you do this together. And I admit that since then, because COVID hit after that and there has been less interaction, I haven't heard more about what the universities are doing, but I do know from, again, 40-year-old history that what I learned in school was very much about the individual, very much about my individual achievement and the person besides me's individual achievement and their competition, and how we could build towards that greater collaboration wasn't really in the curriculum where I grew up. And so I'm very curious to learn more about how that's changed over the several decades since I was in school. So.
Add something about that. One of the things that's interesting about KC Imagine is that sometimes your stakeholders discover things that were kind of outside of their awareness level. For me, when we went into that session, I expected a lot of that panel to be talking about the technical skills and the colleges kind of absorbing, we need more of this technical piece, this other. And it was a very strong message. There was a whole lot more time spent on the essential skills those people need to have entering the workforce than the technical. Not that the technical wasn't important, it's because the schools are very focused on that. But
the foundations of the technical were essential, right, to know it. But take engineering, is like you're going to potentially move from tech stack to tech stack over the course of your career, but having good foundations of programming and architecture are going to carry you across that. But the specifics of any one platform, will be dated pretty quickly. Softer skills was definitely a big one for us.
And those softer skills and that kind of wide-ranging worker the ability of them to range across a lot of categories is especially important, like in a place like Kansas City, because so many of the jobs are not very specialized. You're expected to do some video work or some drawing work. I mean, you're expected to cross the spectrum in terms of digital media disciplines. Having that specialist that really focuses on one tech around here.
I'll say we've had a position open for an information designer for I think over a year now. We just can't seem to find an information designer I'm sorry, I just don't know what people's backgrounds are here, but basically think of it as the if you're building a house, you get an architect to draw the plans. For us, for doing a website or an app, you want a similar kind of architect to kind of draw it out screen by screen, interaction by interaction, what's there, document what's happening, size things, before you get to the visuals and the aesthetics of it, just the functional. And that's one role that we've been hobbling along without, and it's painful trying to do something like that, but we just can't seem to find the person to fit that bill. And that's, we're even starting to open it up outside of Kansas City, and now that COVID has made remote work a little bit easier, but we're still struggling for that role in particular. We only need one of them, and it's tough.
Jim, you want to respond in terms of how this, KC Imagine helps with collaboration from a university perspective?
Thank you, Ron. Can you? Yeah, I can hear myself. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your involvement. It's interesting. I'm going to be the heretic here a little bit in that I do represent colleges and universities. I've been at Johnson County Community College now for 33 of the 50 years it's been in existence, and I've seen a lot of my students go on and work, and what's happening is because of the specialization in the industry, what'd you say, you need somebody with 50 different skills? No one program can do that, I'm sorry. And it doesn't matter whether you're going to a 4-year school or a graduate school or a 2-year program. We're offering 2-year programs in 59 different areas at the colleges, not the transfer programs, the actual programs where when you leave, you go out and get a job. And so whether it's in web design or animation or graphic design or any of those areas, computer programming, marketing, information systems, any of those areas, you come out and you are told that you're going to get a degree, and you do, and that there'll be a job waiting, and there might be, but the reality is that the folks looking for those, they want them to be diversified. And so after 2 years of being an animator, oh, you can't code or you can't do software. And so the students then are looking at me going, well, maybe I have to do a different degree. And I tell them that. I said, yeah, you maybe to diversify and go out and get a computer programming, get the gaming degree on top of that. Take filmmaking and learn how to be a filmmaker. The reality is, and this is the other thing that we tell them, and we're become brutally honest with students in this day and age, thanks to the pandemic and a variety of things, is that the reality is, and I hear this from some of you in the room and our advisory boards, is you don't need the degree. You absolutely don't need a certificate. You don't need a degree. And you should see their parents when I say that. They're like, I said, what you do need is that three-legged stool. You need the soft skills, the communication skills to be able to collaborate. You need the actual design skills or conceptual and design skills to be able to go out and do something unique and be a positive influence on the group that you're working with. And you need those technical skills. And all of those things manifest themselves in the portfolio or the reel or the resume, whatever it is they're showing. And it's tough in a 2-year situation. Hell, it's tough in a 4-year situation for them to get that. You'd love to have somebody comes out that already has 10, 15 years of experience in those areas. And those are unicorns. I'm sorry. And so we tell our kids, be as diversified as you can. When you get one degree, if you go out and get a job, great. Oh, by the way, I tell my students that are coming out of the animation program, you're probably going to have to go to a coast to get a job. We graduated 35 animation students in May of last year. There might have been 4 or 5 of them that already have jobs lined up with some of the local architecture or engineering firms, VMLR, some of the larger places, but most of them, they're going to go out and compete for jobs on the coast. The others decided maybe to transfer, and that's a tough deal because they've already got the animation skills they need. They'll go and get a 4-year degree in something else, and that's great because it might be business. From what I'm hearing, it should be psychology or communication, sociology. Do something other than that to diversify those skills, and we'll do everything we can to move them to UMKC or any of the partners that are up there on the board, K-State, KU, for that. But the reality is that we had to create an Associate of Fine Arts degree. It is 30 hours of gen ed credits, so it'll transfer anywhere in the state of Kansas and most of the metropolitan schools. And then also 30 hours of whatever design, fine arts classes you want to take, because they know in their head they want to be an information designer. And so to do that, they have to have some drafting ability. They have to have some filmmaking ability. They have to have some Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign ability. And they're diversifying their own talents because any one degree doesn't suit them. And so they finish with 30 hours of electives, 10 classes, which isn't really that much when you think about it, so that they can go out and find the job they actually want to do, the one that they would do for free anyway, but they're looking to get paid. And that's always our chore when I'm talking to the folks. It's like, let's find something that you're going to love to do and you would probably do for free, and then let's figure out a way to get you paid. And this is why the partnership with KC Imagine is because all the different firms that you're seeing, they're all wanting something different. And many of the folks that were on that board sit on our animation board. And they're like, well, we need somebody with a lot of skills in After Effects or 2D. And then others will come to us and say, we're looking for presentation people, but they should know AutoCAD also. And my student in animation, like, what? Yeah. So when they do get those skills, many times they don't even make it across the stage. There's also some dirty little secrets about, and this is me being the heretic again. College algebra is a huge stumbling block for artists and designers. And they'll get 57 hours in and never take college algebra because they'd rather have their eyes poked out with glass first, right? It doesn't matter. They show their portfolio, they move on, and they get jobs from there. That is a stumbling block. The other thing is and I'm done here, is that financial aid, federal financial aid, even at Johnson County Community College, where over 40% of the people that go to school there are on some form of federal financial aid, has requirements about which classes they can take, how many classes they can take, and when they hit that limit, they're done. It either becomes out of pocket or becomes maybe scholarship driven. And so it is absolutely affecting the ability of the students to diversify and get a grade. And then they have to go on, and we're happy for them, go on to a 4-year school, to a BFA school somewhere, an art school, and continue to get those skills.
You mentioned something, Jim, that I want to discuss a little further, and that is you mentioned that you often coach your students they're probably gonna have to get their job out somewhere on the coast where there's a greater entertainment or industry than here in Kansas City. So my question for both of you is, can the Kansas City digital scene absorb the talent that's being developed in our local universities? Part of the reason I asked that is part of the reason I'm doing this, why I got involved in nonprofit work after retiring from Hallmark. At Hallmark, we worked on some made-for-TV animation programs, and we had great talent in our building that we wanted to see working on these projects, but all that work was outsourced to Canada, India, and other places. It really upset me that we weren't looking to draw upon the talent we have in our own city and develop that talent. I was in charge of training at Hallmark. I knew we could develop people who could fill some of those roles. But not only did we move those kind of projects off our campus, we also, the recruiting we would do for like animation was on the coast in various places. So can a kid from Overland Park get into animation or data visualization or whatever the job may be through our regional community colleges and get placement here? Does Kansas City need to make some adjustments? How are we looking in terms of being able to absorb the talent we need from within?
Well, that's why we have the partnership with you, right? That is because JCCC is turning out 25 to 35 animators every year, not to mention the web designers, not to mention the graphic designers. The thing is we need to build a local industry that'll support all those graduates and stop losing all that talent somewhere else, or stop forcing them to having to go out to the West Coast. And so that's why we're working with you. We're working with our own government. We're working with the governor of Kansas, several folks, to try and provide tax incentives to get companies to come here and start hiring our folks, or to expand into those. And that is proving to be more of a challenge than what we originally thought, but we're continuing to work with it. We meet with those folks all the time.
Yeah, and I think things got much more complicated in the past 3 years. Sure. When we first connected, I was new to the city, was going to, assuming I would have to build all of the team from local resources. And again, my organization is perhaps bigger than some of the smaller ones that you're talking about, where we can wear individual hats as opposed to 17 different hats. And so I needed that more specialized skill. But in the past year, I think I've lost 2 or 3 people, literally doubling their salaries for remote jobs in larger urban areas, right? Like I know one to a Chicago company, one to a Texas company. And so there's that, right? There's the idea that you might still create a bigger talent pool here in Kansas City. That doesn't actually work for a Kansas City company. So that's still a possibility that I don't think was true 3 years ago when we started talking. Shoot, I had another point, but I've forgotten it. Yeah.
Is there anything that our local government agencies or support agencies like KC SourceLink and other resources that we have, is there anything they can do to help kind of build up that industry here in Kansas City so that we don't lose those people to those remote locations?
I don't know if this is an answer to that question or not, but so the thing that I have not set up here that I had set up in Atlanta when I was working there was a very steady pipeline of interns coming from Georgia Tech, from SCAD, from Georgia State, there in downtown Atlanta. And they would come in, we made tons and tons of video games, so we had a lot of need for QA. QA is the entry-level position at most video game companies. Yeah, and so, yeah, quality assurance. So they're coming in, and they're living the dream. They're playing the video games all day long, looking for bugs, and then they realize that's not a dream because they're playing the same video game over and over and over again, and they're like, wait a minute, this is not fun anymore, and I got to pretend like I'm bad at the game. But what we did is we got to learn these students coming from these organizations and where their soft skills kind of slotted them, or even their interest level slotted them. And then we brought them in, said, okay, well, you seem to like production more, so we're going to make you a producer. You definitely have a technical background. You want to go into engineering. You have a design. You have an animation. We could kind of bring them in. So I still do believe in that internship model. I'm not entirely sure if that's a connection to answer the question you asked, but I do think that that's something I want to continue to create here, and I suspect some of the other companies do as well. As you get to bring folks in, have them understand a little bit more about the world and understand what it is to be a part of that larger ensemble cast.
Well, that's something I'd like to hear from both of you as well, and that is, I think a lot of times, high school student graduates and moves on to a university, and they automatically think they need a 4-year degree. And a lot of our partners are 4-year degree schools, and they promote the 4-year degree. Personally, I'm a graduate of a liberal arts school, and I think it helped me. So I wasn't just focused on the technical skills. I think it helped me build skills that led to management opportunities. And that's something I think you sometimes miss from a more vocationally oriented school. But there's a lot of interest, even by 4-year universities, in something other than a 4-year degree. So for example, there's a lot of interest about building certification programs for digital media. There's not a lot of expectations, as I understand it, by hiring firms for certifications specific to digital media right now, but that there might be if they were developed and offered. And from a university perspective, that's a revenue generating opportunity. That's something a way they can expand their program without building bricks and mortar and hiring a whole lot more staff and paying for a lot more resources. So that includes, non-degree based programs. It puts a lot of emphasis on the portfolio over the degree, and the certification, is just a whole new arena that it opens up. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that space kind of between the high school graduate and the 4-year degree directed student.
A lot of those certificate and training programs are what we call non-credit courses. They are continuing ed courses. They are ones that are that way, and they're specifically designed in all institutions to make money, which means they're expensive. And a lot of times that takes them out of the realm of what somebody right out of high school could afford. And so, again, it's always the bottom line. They go in, you can't get loans, you can't get student financial aid to take continuing ed classes. And in the real world, you get a job first, and maybe your job or your firm wants to coach you up or wants to change your skill sets, and they pay for you to take those continuing ed classes. JCCC has 50% of its revenue comes from continuing ed, but it's more difficult for those kids coming right out of high school to do that kind of thing. Frankly, and this is something that, I'll believe the heretic again, probably they could teach themselves through YouTube and lynda.com and a variety of other things if they are so motivated, if they were given the opportunity to do a lot of that stuff. I don't know how to answer that question in a lot of ways other than just say there are avenues. We have animation classes. In fact, my full-time faculty will teach continuing ed classes on the side to supplement their own income. And to those folks that want to come in and take a 3-weekend in the summer course in 3-dimensional animation or digital sculpting or something like that.
Kind of related to what you're saying is Gary Sage and I were in a very interesting conversation with a Hallmark creative recruiter about a year ago. And having been at Hallmark for 32 years, I knew that you had to have a good portfolio if you wanted to get into the creative division, but you also pretty much had to have a 4-year degree. And so it was a drop the mic moment of shock when that creative recruiter said, well, we don't necessarily require the 4-year degree anymore. It seems like that zone is that requirement is changing. What are you seeing about that in terms of Andrews McNeil, are they still sticking to that kind of requirement? Are they looking in other directions?
I can't speak for other departments, but no, we've taken college requirements off any of our job postings at this point. Instead, prioritizing experience, prioritizing sort of like what their resume shows that they've done. Part of that was sort of revelation to me, in the past few years, understanding that there's bias that works into the recruiting process when you do ask for that. And I'm like, okay, I want to remove that in every way I can. But also, from my own experience, I've hired a lot of people over the years who some didn't have high school degrees, much less college degrees, especially engineers that can be self-taught, as you say, that they can just get a computer and start going at it I had a technical director back at my previous job who'd worked for 30, 40 years. I don't think he'd finished high school, but he was the best engineer I've ever met. So again, there's your heretic for you. He's like, but what it's challenging is like for young folks to bring them in, because like I was saying before, the internship program through a university, like that is a way to get folks in. I don't know of a more formal way, and maybe I'm just ignorant of this, to bring in folks who aren't coming from a university into the system, into the internship program. We have some with high schools, but outside of schools, I don't know any other way to.
The biggest positive I can give to a parent or a student when they come in for a 4-year degree is that if you're going to be in a creative field, if you are going to be a designer or creative in some point, it's all about choices. And the choices you make, the better choices you have, are going to come from a larger library of knowledge you have in your head. And so whatever 4-year degree, that's twice as many classes, twice as many experiences, whether you're traveling internationally, whether you're reading, you're studying art history, you're looking at all the philosophy and all the other things that go with that, help you make better choices when you're out in the real world. Because if you take just a 2-year degree right out of high school, you're going to have the technical skills, you might have the communication and the collaborative skills to do that, but when it comes down to A or B, and B is clearly better, and you would have known that had you taken a 400 level art history class in the Renaissance, you don't know that. And so that's why in a lot of ways I'm saying the best students, frankly, that come out of our program are the ones that come to us with a degree already, but they can't find a job in strategic communications or liberal arts or something like that, and they said, I want to retool. And that's great because they get snapped up immediately by firms because they have that larger volume. Oh, I spent a year in Turkey, or I spent an entire year working as an intern at Hallmark. And then suddenly all of those things added to the animation skills they have make them extremely hireable and typically getting snapped up first. That's my biggest advertisement for getting a 4-year degree. We'll transfer you out from JCCC, but go somewhere and get that degree because ultimately it's going to make you better at the choices you have to make.
One of the things I hear a lot from our educational partners is, can you help us, can KC Imagine help us place interns? We have a couple of partners, like our easternmost partner is University of Missouri in Columbia, Mizzou. They're interested in a Kansas City organization like ours because they don't have enough places to put to take their students for real world learning experiences in digital media. They need a metro like Kansas City to place those kids. And the same is true for our westernmost partner, and that's Kansas State Polytechnic in Salina, which has a good digital media program. Do you have trouble placing your students into internships? And Chris, does Andrews McNeil absorb a lot of interns, or what are some of the challenges you face around internships?
I don't think there are any challenges. Just recently, before the pandemic, we were bringing in cohorts of interns. That the HR and recruiting department was looking for a group of interns to come through, and then they would drift through the entire organization, right? Like they would just sample each one. So that program was running really well. The pandemic kind of squashed that, and I don't think it's come back up yet. So I'm anxious and hopeful that we're going to do that again soon. But that's the more formal internship program that's a part of Andrews McNeil. we have the sort of the one-offs, like I was talking before about wanting folks for QA, or as we find them. The only I guess the only challenge that I have is that sometimes some of my managers go this is going to sound mean, put maybe too much energy into it, and that's a positive thing. So that can distract them from the job, but it's good for the person doing the internship, right? Because I just had somebody come through and they cycled through multiple departments, and then those leaders would then have to take days, kind of bringing them up to speed on all the various things. So it's possibly it can be, if it's not managed well, it can be a drain on the productivity of the team. But I don't know, I feel like that's a good problem, because what we're doing is we're investing in that pipeline of folks that we can say, like, oh, hey, well, now that you know this and we know you, we can now bring you into the organization as a junior producer or as a junior programmer or whatever it might be. But that's the potentially only challenge I can think of.
We have had a bear of a time finding folks that are willing to provide internships for our animation students. We have robust areas of internships in graphic design and also in interior design. All of our automated drafting, our computer-aided drafting programs have no problems getting folks into internship programs, and they typically turn those into jobs afterwards. But there is not, and this is why we like being with you guys and want to build this industry, there's just not enough firms out there to offer internship programs for students who are learning Maya and ZBrush and Unreal Engine and all those things here locally, so that they'd be able to apply those.
So I have one last question, and that is, it's 5 years out, it's 1920, what is it, 7, or 2027. Let's get in the right century to start out with.
And one moves to California.
Yeah, that's right. And we're in the Laffergram building. What vision would you like to see KC Imagine fill in this next 5 years? What would you like to look around and see in terms of digital media industry, your programs? How can KC Imagine make that a better scene in 5 years?
5 years. I hope that by having this ecosystem of building, the digital talent pipeline, as well as pulling together some of the digital studios or companies that do it, that you can actually grow more businesses here too. Like, I'm assuming that is kind of the goal of this, right? Is that we have more people making video games, people making animation, people making just different software, and those companies growing, so that the whole area just benefits from that and becomes that hub. So I don't. It's already helping me, but now I'm hoping that it helps the rest of the new great ideas that are out there.
Man, if I knew that, I'd be a rich man in 5 years. The reality is, and this is kind of what you touched on earlier, is I'd love for firms, regardless of where they are, to be able to recruit from Kansas City and then hire those folks and have them work for their home in Overland Park or North Kansas City based on their talent and not where they live. And I'd love for us to be known as an outstanding hub of animation talent because of the training, of all digital storytelling talent, because of the training, the outstanding high schools that are here locally, as well as the outstanding four-year schools. And that maybe because of that outstanding talent pool, they're also opening up branch offices here. And so Pixar suddenly has an office down next door to Laffergram Studios, and Activision has a big high-rise down on the plaza that they're hiring people. That'd be great. But more than anything, it'd be nice, and that's more than 5 years, if they would just bother to not have somebody go to the West Coast or to their main offices. And you and I, Gavin and I, were talking about that earlier, about how do I get a job and not have to leave Overland Park? And can I make that work in a digital society now where everything's done with Zoom or file transfers in the cloud? And 5 years from now, that's doable. But it's just a matter of waking those firms up outside of Kansas City and then growing our own corporation, our own businesses, our own industry locally.
Well, thank you. It's that kind of vision that energizes us at KC Imagine. That's why it's so valuable to have partners like you. So thank you for joining me up here today, and thank you, Kevin, for the opportunity to share what we're trying to do. And I think that's what we wanted to share with you. Unless you have anything else or questions, we appreciate your attention and interest. And if you have questions, feel free to tap us after our session is over. Thank you.
Thanks.